Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's start/bench recommendations, and then the free agency suggestion video. We're gonna kick this off. I'm gonna go back and look at the guys I recommended last week, so that way you guys can clown me on the ones I was wrong on. See which ones I was right on, so that way you can judge how much you want to take my opinions into consideration for these videos. That type of thing. Pretty much just going over my work. Um, we'll kick off with that. When we get to the free agency section, I'm gonna list off the players that I recommended last week that are still available, and then I'm also going to be adding another two additional players per position that I would recommend. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, about half the league didn't get any recommendations from me. For example, like Pussy, I think Mr. Steeler Girl didn't get any recommendations. I don't believe Toxic or Dictatorship did last week. Um, so I believe 5 or 6 people. J-Bay didn't get my recommendations from last week because I thought their teams were already set up about as good as they could have been, so I didn't make any recommendations there. Um, for MILF last week, I actually recommended that he bench Brandon Cooks and start Jerry Jeudy. Um, he had to actually start Jerry Jeudy anyway because Brandon Cooks ended up being out with an injury, so you can't really judge that. It was going to happen anyway. So there isn't really a way to take a proper look at that one, and it's actually the same thing uh, with Big Yawners, where I recommended that he start Christian Kirk over Gus Edwards, but he ended up needing to start both of them anyway because he had Aaron Jones get hurt. Um, so overall, really isn't a up or down for that one. But where we did actually have some suggestions that ended up playing an impact was between Booty Basher and PMC and Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled. With Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled, we'll kick off with him. This is where we actually broke even with the suggestions. Both of the players he had got the exact same amount of points. Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled, I recommended he started Pete Werner here. He had 10 points, and I recommended he bench Jack Campbell, who also had 10 points. So if Scrambled would have listened to me, nothing would have changed. Um, Going over to Booty Basher. With Booty Basher, I actually recommended that he start out with benching Sky Moore in exchange for Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis got 23.2 and Sky Moore got 18, which was still pretty good. But overall, listening to my recommendation, that got him a good 5.2 in terms of the positive compared to what he would have had. And then I also recommended that he start the Packers defense over the Bengals defense, which actually costed him 0.30 points. So overall, he went into the net positive of 4.9 points from listening to my advice. You can see it there, 9.05 compared to the Packers defense, which is somewhere there, 8.75. So overall, he went into the net positive of about 5 points. Nothing too crazy, but just a little bit in the green. And then I think in terms of last week's video, the person that benefited from it the most was actually PMC Wagner. PMC Wagner, I recommended they bench Kadarius Toney and start Garrett Wilson. They did just that. Garrett Wilson had 22.30, while Kadarius Toney had 6.8. Now, if you can do the math there, that's an additional 15.5 points that PMC earned by following that move. So overall, I think they were pretty good recommendations for week one. I hope I can keep giving you guys good ones. And without further ado, let me give you guys some recommendations for this week. Alrighty. So to kick things off with MILF, of course it's MILF. Who else would it be? To kick things off with MILF, I actually have him. I recommend you start Brandon Cooks and then put Dalvin Cook in at your running back, and then bench James and Jamal Williams if he's hurt. If he's starting, don't necessarily do that. This is just if he's hurt, which it's looking increasingly likely as the days go on that he will be. So I would recommend you start out of all the players on your bench. I would go Brandon Cooks as your number one guy out of those guys on the bench, assuming he plays as well, because you got a lot of questionable guys here. Then I would also recommend you bench Jerick McKinnon. If unless Pacheco ends up being out, I don't think Pacheco will be out, but it is a possibility, so keep an eye on him. But unless Pacheco ends up being out, I would bench McKinnon and I would actually start Rashad Bateman this week because Rashad Bateman has a chance of playing without OBJ, which means his upside could actually be a lot higher than it usually is, meaning he'll get more targets, more shares, overall more likely. And Jerick McKinnon really hasn't been doing anything. However, if Isaiah Pacheco were to go down this week, Jerick McKinnon might actually be a pretty solid start to play. This is just in the scenario that everybody stays healthy besides Jamal Williams, who's almost confirmed, or Jamal Williams, who's almost confirmed out at this point. Overall, I think your best move is just to start Brandon Cooks, put Dalvin Cook in at running back, put Brandon Cooks in at one of your flex spots, and put Rashad Bateman in at the other one. That's pretty much, I think, what your best moves will be here. Next up, moving on to Pussy. And this is going to be something you're not going to like to hear, but I actually recommend that you bench Kyle Pitts and start Dalton Kincaid. Now, here's the thing, and this is a very controversial thing because Kyle Pitts is one of those tight ends that has the elite upside out of all the tight ends in fantasy. Here's the thing it's so hard to defend Kyle Pitts at this point. He started out week 1 with only 2 catches. He did get some good yards out of it, which salvaged the week, so he had 44 yards out of those 2 catches. Week 2, 2 catches for 15 yards, so he's only getting 2 catches per game right now. He got less yards this time, and he may have gotten 5 points, but I'm pretty sure the other 2 points were from a tackle solo because, once again, Ritter's dog shit. But as if that wasn't concerning enough that he's doing bad, you'll actually look over here at Jonnu Smith. Let me find him real quick. Jonnu Smith, another tight end for Atlanta, is actually going in there and is outproducing Kyle Pitts in fantasy. 4 catches for 47 yards. If that's not a red flag, I don't know what is. I really cannot defend putting Kyle Pitts in anymore. The upside is technically there, but unless you're in a game where you absolutely need high upside to function, I don't think putting Pitts in is worth it. I would recommend starting Dalton Kincaid just based on the options you have on your team here. One second. Based on the guys you have on your team, you only have Kincaid as the other option. But there is some bright side with Kincaid, and we only have 2 games off of sample size to work with so far. However, not only is he increasing in catches, he's increasing in yards based on the games. That's at least a step in the right direction. Like I said, it's a very small sample size, but at least he's trending in the right direction while Kyle Pitts is at rock bottom and continues to dig. So overall, I would say out of the options, I would actually start Kincaid if I were you this week. And that's pretty much the only suggestion I have for Pussy. For Booty Basher, I would say, here, let me click on his name real quick. For Booty Basher, I would actually bench DeAndre Swift this week. I know after the phenomenal game he had last week, absolutely amazing game he had last week, he is playing against one of the best run defenses in the league. He might be getting Kenneth Gainwell, Rashad Penny, and Boston Scott all back. Rashad Penny wasn't out, but the other 2 were for last week's game. So overall, this really is not looking like an ideal matchup for DeAndre Swift. It's not looking likely that he's going to have a good game at all. They're probably going to be passing a lot more than they're running, and even when they do run, he's probably going to get stuffed or split the backfield between all those other running backs. I would bench DeAndre Swift for George Pickens, and in a similar way as I told you last week with Gabe Davis, George Pickens this time is actually the guy playing the Raiders. And as you saw with Gabe Davis last week, absolutely cooking up on that Raiders defense. Their pass defense is atrocious, absolutely horrible. I'm anticipating George Pickens having a very good game. I think he'll go out there and get a lot of fantasy points this week against the Raiders, just like Gabe Davis did. But I would keep Gabe Davis in over DeAndre Swift just because of how bad that matchup is overall. Like, that is probably one of the worst scenarios you could have for Swift, at least for this week. And once again, I would advise you start Green Bay over Cincinnati, just because Green Bay will be playing against a Saints team that's not going to be having a running back. They might be using a third string. They might be using a fucking tight end. Who knows? And we'll talk about him later. But overall, I would still recommend starting Green Bay over Cincinnati out of your options here. But yeah, the Rams have been looking pretty good on offense, but the Saints have been struggling to score touchdowns all year. Plus, they're missing the running back room. So yeah, it's not really looking great. for the Saints, so I would definitely recommend Green Bay over Cincinnati again. Next up, we're going to look at big yawners. Now, big yawners, your whole team is a what if, in the sense of you look down here, it's like a fucking Star Wars ship going on, Q, 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 Q. But yeah, your whole team is just in the hospital right now. So there's obviously your top three guys, Jones, Burrow, Cooper. If they're all healthy, start them all immediately. Obviously, start Burrow over Garoppolo, start Cooper over Edwards, and then start Aaron Jones over. I would actually say Ford. I would start Zach Moss over Jeremy Ford if push came to shove with all those players actually playing and being healthy. You don't know for sure what you're going to see out of Ford and Kareem Hunt yet. It could be like entirely Kareem Hunt's backfield. You have no idea. I would give it a week to sit before you immediately go starting him in all gung ho. That's just me though. I would definitely wait and see what you have with all that. First, for sure, Zach Moss. In comparison, though, went in there and was the entire Indianapolis backfield. He didn't really have anyone to compete with. Got a good 20 points. He had 18 rushing attempts. He had 4 catches, a touchdown. Everything's looking good. Everything's checking out. Good O-line. Overall, I would much rather start Zach Moss over Jeremy Ford, as weird as that might sound. Um, but I would still start Jeremy Ford over Gus Edwards. Like I've been talking about how much I dislike Ravens players this year in terms of offense and fantasy. And yeah, there's just so many people that can get this ball. I will never trust Gus Edwards. At least Jeremy Ford will only have to deal with Kareem Hunt and maybe them passing a lot more, but he is a passing back. Gus Edwards is not. He is a power back. There's really no win-win scenario for Gus Edwards unless he happens to get a touchdown. That'll pretty much bail him out of having bad weeks, and it's what you're entirely relying on, which is never what you want. Um, Next up, we'll go to PMC Wagner, who this week, if he's healthy, I would start Isaiah Pacheco and I would bench Raheem Mostert. Now, I understand Raheem Mostert did amazing last week against the New England Patriots defense, but it was because the Patriots went out of their way to try to minimize Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, which pretty much left them in a situation where they only had one middle linebacker to take on the Dolphins' entire run game, which usually isn't a good idea. So, yeah, Raheem Mostert just ran all over him, but he's another one with a tough scenario this week where he is playing a very tough Denver defense. Um, Denver's pass defense was actually looking bad last week, but their run defense, it was actually looking iffy last week too, but I think they're going to bounce back and have a lot better of a run defense week this week compared to how they normally have. Their defense still is pretty good. I think people sleep on them a lot, especially after the Commanders did what they did to them last week. But overall, if Pacheco's healthy, start him over Mostert. Other than that, I don't really have any recommendations for you. Mr. Steeler Girl, I don't have any recommendations for you, by the way. I wanted to say that at the start, but I think your team is set all perfect. Toxic Zenpai. If Quincy Williams is healthy, your linebacker there, I would actually bench Jerome Baker. Jerome Baker's been doing so far. I think he had 11 and 9. Reverse those numbers, and I would prefer it a lot more. But he is getting decent amount of tackles, 6 and 7. That's actually solid. But Quincy Williams just has a lot higher upside with around the same floor as that guy's producing on a weekly basis. That's what I'd recommend as long as Quincy Williams is healthy. With scrambled and wiggle waggled, I would bench Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and I would start Pete Werner. I think Jack Campbell is in the position where he's starting to get more snaps at linebacker. I would say it might get to the point where he's actually going to start being trustable to go in there and start, and he's actually going to go out there and start putting up more and more points as the weeks go on. I was just iffy on that for the first few weeks because they weren't playing him that much, but it looked like they were starting to use him more this week. And I think they're going to keep that trend going. It wouldn't make any sense for them to backtrack at this point with the snap count. I wouldn't play Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. You're in a very tight matchup in Owusu-Koramoah as boom or bust. I don't think you really need to try to go for a boom or bust guy, especially when the guy's boom really isn't that high. So overall, I would go for Pete Werner, get those safer points. We keep talking about how he keeps getting screwed over with these assists, but overall 7, 8 tackles solo plus all the other stats he has like sack or half sack and all that stuff. But overall, I would definitely take your safe points here over Owusu Koromoa, especially. Well, there is one upside of Owusu Koromoa, and that he's playing one of the worst O lines in the league. But I still don't think I would trust it. I would still go Pete Werner over him. And then Karen's husband is the last person I have advice for. Now, for you, I would bench Rondell Moore and start Rashawn Johnson for the Chicago Bears. Now, I would bench Rondell Moore because he is going up against that Cowboys defense that you can ask your big older brother Evan just what the Cowboys defense did to the last guy. You can ask PMC Wagner the same question. Or heck, you can ask Caleb because, yeah, the Cowboys defense just, yeah, they definitely mafiaed their way into getting Evan some wins in this fantasy league. So, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. They'll probably show you around town to the Dallas Cowboys way. Either way, what I'm saying is Rondell Moore is not going to do good this week. The Cowboys are going to absolutely bully this Arizona offense all around the board. The only person that can even be argued as a startable person this week is James Conner, and even then, I think he's going to be entirely reliant on just getting a bunch of catches in the backfield for checkdowns because he's not going to get many yards. He's not going to get a touchdown. He's not. He might get a touchdown if he gets lucky, but he's not going to be getting anything safe. I thought about having uh, Pussy actually benched James Conner this week, but he didn't really have another option I liked to start over him. So you're kind of hoping he just gets a lot of checkdowns this week. It's a very bad matchup for anybody on the Cardinals in general. But I would start Rashawn Johnson just because week 1 he had 17.5, week 2 he had 8.2. Now, he's only getting 4 or 5 rush attempts per game, which isn't that great, but he is getting a few catches as well. Now, that might sound bad how he kind of stepped back week 2 compared to week 1. However, it's like I said, the Bears aren't stupid. They were going, well, never mind. The Bears are very stupid. Don't get me wrong in the slightest, but it's that Tampa Bay defense, one of the best run defenses in the league, like we were just talking about. I think he goes in and plays the Chiefs. Their run defense is not nearly as good as the Buccaneers is. I think once he goes in and he'll start getting a lot more snaps, he'll start going in. He's already sharing exactly around 50% of the snaps with Khalil Herbert. I think Deontay Foreman is completely out of the picture. So I think it's down to those two. And yeah, Rashawn Johnson, I think, is just going to start slowly eating away at the workload Khalil Herbert gets, as much as it pains me to say because I have Herbert. But overall, I would start him this week over Rondell Moore just because Rondell Moore just is not looking good this week overall, and Rashawn Johnson is probably the best option you have on your bench. Now let's get into the free agency pickups. Now, when it comes to quarterbacks, last week the guys I recommended were C.J. Stroud and Mac Jones. C.J. Stroud got taken. Mac Jones is still there. He's still doing okay. You know, he had 16.74 points. Week 1, he had 31 points. So overall, he's doing eh. The week 1, he did pretty dang good, but I don't think it's going to be too consistent. But overall, he's better than the other options on here. And since I had to add 2 options to my recommendation list, I'm definitely not adding Mr. Clean over here. I'm adding Desmond Ridder and Zach Wilson because at least they're starting for the rest of the year. Josh Dobbs probably has like 3 more weeks and he's done. But those are pretty much the 2 I added in there just because they're the only options. I'm not really going to go into detail over how good or bad they are just because, well, they're both shit. But if I had to choose one, I'd go with Desmond Ridder just because at least he has something. He has a somewhat decent O-line and he can scramble. That's about all he has going for him. They both suck. I would not recommend either of them unless you were in an absolute shithole. And then looking at the running backs, both the options I recommended last week are actually still on the free agency. One was Cordell Patterson, who ended up missing last week. They made him inactive. I'm not sure what they're planning on doing there, but if he ends up starting, definitely start taking a look at him because they said they plan on using him as a joker. I told you about all that last week where he could play as a multiple position guy, and he's going to be doing kick returns. So overall, he's looking like he might be better than a lot of these guys on free agency. And then the other guy I recommended was Deion Jackson. Don't even worry about him. He's irrelevant at this point. Yeah, this guy. He literally did nothing. I don't think he was on the field a singular time. This is Zach Moss's backfield now. He was Deion Jackson played like such dog shit that he got benched in a week. So yeah, this guy's irrelevant. You can scratch him off your watch list, whatever you want to do. This guy's horrible. But anyway, going on to the new additions I added to the list this week. Deuce Vaughn for the Cowboys. Now, week 1, he didn't really do too much. He had 6 rushing attempts, but that was about it. Week 2, he actually went in there and had a bit less rushing attempts, 3 for 16. However, he did have 3 catches for 16 yards, and I think the Cowboys have planned on using him at some point and trying to figure out a way to get him implemented in the offense since the preseason. We just got to see how well it turns out. Overall, I'd say he's probably one of the better options on free agency, even though he's not great. I'll admit, none of these guys are really great, but you're kind of picking at straws here. And then I'd go with Tajay Spears as the next pick, because not only is he able to actually produce some points from time to time, where he's getting 3 rush attempts for 27 yards and then a catch for yards. He also had 8 attempts last week, which is promising. That's actually a solid amount of attempts to get for guys buried this deep in free agency. He had 49 yards. He also had 2 catches for 6 yards. So overall, at least for his amount he's doing, maybe he starts eating into Henry's workload more often later in the season. I doubt that, but he might still have his weeks where he goes in there and actually can make some plays happen. And also in the scenario that Derrick Henry goes down, he's another guy that right off the bat would be an instant starter for a lot of teams in terms of fantasy. So yeah, keep an eye on him. Taking a look at our wide receivers, last week I recommended Allen Robinson and Robert Woods. Allen Robinson went in there for the Steelers and really didn't do much against the Browns, but he was getting the primary coverage on him. George Pickens was able to make a few break-off plays because Allen Robinson was drawing the coverage short. I don't think that's going to be the case every week. Usually, if teams utilize Allen Robinson right, at least they'll use him in a position where they can use him to open up other receivers instead of just using him to be bait the entire time. You know what I mean? They usually will want to mix it up. So I think keep an eye on Allen Robinson still, especially against the Raiders here. See how he does. He does bad, take him off your list. He does good, keep him on there, especially while Deontay Johnson's gone. And then Robert Woods is actually somebody that I am surprised nobody has yet on their team. Robert Woods, week 1 and 2, 12.37, 13.87, 6 catches both games, solid amount of yards, and he also has those few pieces of brownie points with those return yards. So overall, he's probably the most consistent receiver you're going to see on this free agency list. So if you want a receiver to go in and plug and play, say right now, he's your guy. He's not going to be like anything elite with high upside or anything like that. He's just going to go in and get you probably around 10 points. And it's a remotely safe bet, but he's definitely looking a lot more consistent than anybody else, that's for sure. And then the 2 guys I actually added to the wide receiver list from this week is Devontae Parker for the Patriots, who is coming back from an injury, and I think he might be hurt again. But either way, Devontae Parker, people usually forget how good he actually is. He went in there, had 13.7 points, 6 catches, 57 yards. Yeah, keep an eye out on him. Devontae Parker is a lot better than people always give him credit for. He's always been one of the more underrated receivers in the league. Yeah, just keep an eye on him. He's miles better than anyone on this free agency list except for maybe Robert Woods. And Darth, I ask that you turn this video off now because what I'm about to say makes me want to throw up inside, and it just makes me sad. The next recommendation I have, and this is if Darnell Mooney is out, and if you're still watching, Darth, you know where this is going. Dear God, Chase Claypool. If Darnell Mooney were to miss another game, Chase Claypool will actually be a decent guy to start in here as long as he can catch the fucking football. He's going to be going in as the Chicago Bears wide receiver 2, and you're not going to be able to find many other wide receiver 2s out there. So overall, if the Bears are in a shootout game with the Chiefs, for example, Claypool might actually be a pretty good guy to have in terms of your starting lineup for this week and any weeks that Darnell Mooney might miss. But if Darnell Mooney plays, ignore everything I'm saying about Chase Claypool and then go take a piss on his name afterwards because he's dog shit and I hate him. But anyway, in terms of fantasy, he might be one of the better options out there. I regret saying all of that. I might just delete this video. Nobody heard that. Anyway, going into the tight ends, the recommendations I had last week were Zach Ertz, who already got taken by, I believe, Toxic Zenpai. Um, and he's still looking pretty solid. Like I said, when Murray comes back, his upside's going to go even higher. And then there was Adam Troutman, who did jack shit diddly squat for the Broncos, so I would take him off your watch list. In this week, and this is where, if you're a guy like Pussy, for example, or somebody else that has a struggling tight end that you cannot rely on, that you think is going to not give you a consistent amount of points this week, turn your attention to nobody else other than Taysom Hill. Where's he at? Taysom Hill. Where the hell is Taysom Hill? There he is. Turn your attention to Taysom Hill, who, if he's healthy, with all these Saints running backs being out, might go in there and play quarterback slash running back slash, hell, maybe tight end sometimes. Yahoo counts him as a tight end. But here's the thing. When you have a guy like Kyle Pitts, for example, you could easily go in there and throw Taysom Hill in there, who has a lot better chance of, or at least for this week, who has a lot better chance of reaching that upside that Kyle Pitts has. You know what I mean? And he can actually get a lot more than that upside. And odds are he'll probably score around what Pitts is getting anyway, like 3 points or so anyway, at the worst. You know what I mean? I think if you're a guy that's looking for something like that, where your tight end can't get you any points as it is, you may as well go shoot for the stars. Taysom Hill is your answer this week, specifically. So keep an eye out for him for now. Once Kamara comes back, he'll be useless again, though. And then if you're looking for the probably most consistent guy off of the free agency list, it's probably Logan Thomas, although he's probably not going to play this week. But in future weeks, out of all these options on the free agency list, if I had to lean one direction, I'd go for Logan Thomas. He was getting 4 catches, 43 yards, 2 catches for 22 yards. And I know that 2 catches is concerning, but he did catch a touchdown, and then he did get removed from the game because he got injured right there. So overall, there was a lot more game left, so he could have done a lot better throughout the game. I wouldn't be too concerned about that. He's probably the most consistent option you have out there. And then let's go into kickers. Kickers, last week I actually recommended Brett Maher, who actually had another really good week in week 2, who once again was the number 2 kicker in the league. I think he might be number 1 now, if I'm not mistaken, maybe number 2. Either way, this Rams team really likes to kick field goals. They really don't like to score touchdowns, I guess. So yeah, keep your eye on him. And it's the same thing with the Saints guy, Group A. He only had 8 points this week, but he was playing in a very low-scoring game. These Saints don't really like scoring points, I guess. They're point phobes, which is why I really recommend Booty start the Packers over the Bengals again. But like I said, keep an eye on him, especially when Alvin Kamara comes back. He might end up being the next Will Lutz, as we were talking about last week. And then the new guys I added to this kicker list are Dustin Hopkins for the Chargers. Or no, I'm sorry. He used to play for the Chargers. For the Browns, who I think the Browns are going to be one of those teams that are good enough to get into field goal range a lot of times, but aren't going to be getting a lot of touchdowns, especially now that they're missing their number 1 running back in Nick Chubb. So I think they expect a lot more field goals out of the Browns. He might actually be a solid kicker. And then I also added Cameron Dicker for the Chargers because just like Dustin Hopkins last year, the Chargers are going to be scoring a lot of points, which means they're probably going to be getting a lot of field goals. They're going to be getting a lot of touchdowns for extra points. So overall, he'll probably be one of the more consistent options out there. Plus, he's playing. Who's he playing this week? I thought they were playing somebody not that strong. But anyway, for overall, I would recommend him. Now, for defense, last week I recommended 2 guys entirely, or 2 teams based on their matchups. I recommended Indianapolis, who actually played Houston. They did really good. And I recommended the Giants, who did really bad. Yeah, the Giants might actually be as bad as the Cowboys made them out to be. They almost lost to the fucking Cardinals. But you know what? Danny Dimes came in there and was Jesus Christ himself and parted the seas like he was Tom Brady / Brett Favre in their prime. So yeah, pretty good. But no, the defense was dog shit. Do not ever pick up the Giants defense for the rest of the season or probably ever in your lifetime again. Do not make the mistake that I may or may not have recommended you guys in the last video. But at least the Colts were good, so yeah, I was 1-1. The new guys, or the new defenses I recommended for this week are actually going to be Cleveland. If you're looking for a long-term defense, Cleveland is a very good option because after this week, yeah, they have a tough schedule coming up with the Ravens, the 49ers. But after that, you take a look at it. The Seahawks, yeah, that can be a tough matchup. But the Colts are going to be pretty easy. The Cardinals are going to be pretty easy. The Ravens, again, that's a tough one. The Steelers will probably be a pretty good matchup for the defense because remember how good the Browns did on Monday against the Steelers. The only reason they didn't do better is because Deshaun Watson was actively handing out touchdowns like he was handing out massages to women. Um, and yeah, overall, and here's the main thing to highlight. If you're in a position where you think your team is going to make the playoffs in this fantasy league, you're going to want this Browns defense. Here's why. Look at this matchup core they have for weeks 15, 16, 17. That's the fantasy football playoffs. Quarterfinals, they play the Bears. The Bears offense is dog shit. All right. Semifinals, they play Houston, whose offense isn't as bad as people are saying it is, but still is a lot worse than most of the offenses out there. And then they go and play MILF Smasher Zach Wilson himself with the Jets. Overall, that is a huge, amazing streak of matchups that you'll have come playoff time that could really benefit you if you're playing the matchups. And if you have them ahead of time, nobody else is going to be able to have something like that in the playoffs, so you could have a good advantage. And then for this specific week, I think your best option is probably Seattle, who's playing Carolina. Now, Carolina's offense has been horrible throughout the year. Seattle kind of got thrown around by the Rams' offense and the Lions' defense, to be fair, but Seattle did make a lot of big plays with a pick six. They had some fumble recoveries. They had some good return yards as well. But overall, they do play Carolina, who might be missing Miles Sanders this week, who might be missing Miles Sanders this week. So overall, he's probably the guy I'd recommend the most. Next up, looking at the D lineman that I recommended last week, I actually recommended Jermaine Johnson. I believe the other guy I recommended has already been taken. Yes, he has. But I recommended Johnson from the Jets. And I actually still do recommend at least taking a look at him. Guess I can't do that. I thought I could look at the projections from here. Oh, there he is. But anyway, at least take a look at him. The projections are not doing him justice for whatever reason. He's not projected anything, but believe me, he's out there playing. He's getting, if he can manage to get sacks, you'll see weeks like he had week 1. Week 2, even though he didn't put up any big stats, as a defensive lineman, he's still getting 4 tackles solo, which means he has a base level of consistency he's probably going to have on a week-to-week basis. And keep in mind, that was against the Dallas defense too, or Dallas offensive line too, one of the better ones in the league. So overall, I still think he's worth keeping a very close eye on. He's doing pretty good. Now, my new recommendations on this list are Sam Hubbard. Now, I don't know what we're doing, guys. Somebody out there who is struggling with their D-line, pick Sam Hubbard up. I don't know why he was dropped. My D-linemen, I think, are good enough to not need to pick him up. But this guy, overall, should not be on the free agency list right now. Sure, he had 11 points week 1, which is solid. 8 tackles solo, or 8 tackles total. And then week 2, he only had 6, sure, but that's still 4 total tackles, again, for a defensive lineman. And he was playing two of the better offensive lines in the league here, keep in mind, right? And Lamar Jackson, who is he's literally a running back. You know what I mean? 2 of the worst matchups you can see for a defensive lineman. And even then, Hubbard still had a level of consistency. Keep an eye on him. Even if you don't trust what I'm saying right now, because I promise you, Hubbard by the end of the year or by some of these upcoming weeks, is gonna change your mind if you keep an eye on him. I don't know why anybody dropped him, but if you want a defensive lineman, right here, he's probably one of the better guys you can get on this whole free agency list, to be honest. And then also Derek Brown. This one's a little more understandable for people not noticing him. Now, Derek Brown, he had 26.5 week 1 and 11 points week 2, which is pretty dang good. Now, I'm not even just looking at the sack he had. I actually like looking at the tackles for a lot of players. 8 tackles solo week 1, 4 solo week 2, and 3 assists. That's 7 and 8. If he can keep that up, that is a level of consistency that you would kill for as a defensive lineman, where he's getting around 10 points at the worst every single week. Plus sacks will make it toward 20 points plus for upside. That's ideally what you're looking for. So overall, keep an eye on him. Maybe pick him up if you think you trust him right off the bat, although it is a small sample size out of 2 games, but that's exactly what you're looking for out of a player on defense, though. Then looking at the DBs, the only guy left that I recommended was Deshaun Elliott, who week 1 blew up with a lot of tackles. Week 2, he didn't blow up so much. He had 3 tackles, solo, and assist, which isn't horrible. It's not great, though. He had a fumble recovery and a pass deflect, so he was still pretty much all over the place, but he wasn't nearly as good as he was week 1. Keep an eye on him. I think he'll still keep doing pretty good. He'll probably do better than he did in week 2. He'll probably do better in week 3 here. So yeah, overall, just keep an eye on him just like last week. And then I added Cameron Bynum to the list this week. And this is a guy I actually do recommend you pick up if you're looking for a defensive back here. 10 tackles solo week 1, or 5 tackles solo week 1, 5 assists, so 10 total tackles, right? Week 2, you see that right, 6 tackles solo, 9 assists. That's 15 times he's at the ball able to score points. It really doesn't get better than that. It's just a matter of if he can remain consistent on it. One of the better safeties out there that you can probably find, at least for right now. And then the second guy I decided to add on here was Jalen Thompson, and we talked about him briefly in the previous video with Cranberry formerly having him. Now, Jalen Thompson wouldn't be that great. However, the Cardinals are going to be out their all-pro safety, Budda Baker, and I thought about this past week of what could happen with Budda Baker not being there. I didn't think too much of it, but then I saw Jalen Thompson play. He went from getting about 5 total tackles to getting 7, so right off the bat he's getting a few more tackles as it is. So 5 tackles solo, 2 assists. He had a pick, he had a pass deflect, he had a tackle for loss, he had 35 return yards. He's all over the place right now that Budda Baker's gone. So keep an eye on him. He's looking like he's going to replace Budda Baker as that main tackler for that Arizona defense, at least while Baker's gone. All right, and then looking at the linebackers, both of the linebackers I recommended this past week have been taken. But the new guys I'm going to recommend are going to be Alex Highsmith, actually. For all you Steeler fans out there, you get to have a player on the free agency list watch. Now, Alex Highsmith, while Cam Hayward has been gone and history has shown time and time again, he decides to blow up. So he does really good when Hayward's gone for whatever reason. 7 total tackles, 9 total tackles, a sack, a pick 6, tackle for loss, 30 return yards. Yeah, he just does really good when Hayward's gone. So he's one of those players, though, where tackles probably aren't going to be that consistent for him, although throughout the first 2 weeks, hell, they have been. But overall, you're taking him kind of like TJ Watt, where he has that sack upside that could get him 30 points and could outscore guys like Roquan Smith on a week-to-week basis, but he's just not going to be as consistent. But yeah, he's the best way I can describe this guy is he's like dollar store TJ Watt. But overall, at least while Cam Hayward's gone, which is all the way until November, he's there. He's probably one of the better options in terms of high-scoring guys you can get. And then I also have Denzel Perryman coming in right here. He'll probably be one of the more consistent guys on this free agency list. He had 20 points week 1. Week 2, he had 13, and then he got hurt mid-game. But overall, that's 11 tackles combined, 8 tackles combined, and then he got hurt. That's about as good as you can get or ask for a linebacker. Really good around the board. His only issue, like I told you guys before, is that he gets hurt a lot. But overall, he's one of the more consistent guys out there. He's not projected much, so he's kind of flying underneath the radar. So yeah, keep an eye on him. Definitely recommend him. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll look back at everything next week, see what I got wrong, see what I got right. Hopefully this helped you guys out, and I'll catch you guys later. Or I'll catch you guys tomorrow for WWD and the transactions of the last week. See you later.